Hello and welcome to the Legends of Opera, where we shall be delving into the lives of the incredible singers who have given us the heritage of opera. Luciano Pavarotti, possibly the most distinctive tenor in opera, and what an exquisite voice.
Luciano Pavarotti is one of the best voices that appeared the last century.
It really was a case of vocal sunshine, if you like, as soon as he opened his mouth.
Luciano on the stage is a great presence.
When Pavarotti sings the opening of the aria E luceva le stelle from Tosca, time just stops for anyone who has an appreciation of singing. Is he the finest Cavaradossi ever? He certainly becomes the role, and tears are shed.
He was one of these singers who really connected with the masses, perhaps for the first time. Of course, most obviously in the 1990 World Cup.
The young boy who learned to sing alongside his father in a local choir in Modena took the world by storm. His Nessun Dorma from Turandot at the 1990 World Cup concert became his signature piece, and the Three Tenors album became the highest-selling record ever in classical music.
He seemed like an ordinary guy. I think people could identify with him. He was a bloke. People found that fascinating.
I think he was the archetypal Italian tenor.
Luciano Pavarotti charmed the world with his singing and broke through to the public wherever he sang. Those who saw him sing were touched by his gift. He is unforgettable.
He was a great singer, probably the most strongest voice ever.
I think in terms of vocal charisma, he's more or less in a class of his own.
Luciano Pavarotti was born into a working-class family on the outskirts of the Italian city of Modena on October 12th, 1935. Son of Adele Venturi, a cigar factory worker, and Fernando, a local baker and amateur singer in the Modena choir, the Choral Rossini. The young Luciano grew up in a home filled with music.
There's this myth about Italy that ordinary Italians go around singing Verdi operas and Puccini operas, and everybody loves opera. And I don't think it's true, but I think in the case of Pavarotti's family, it was true.
I think there is nobody who doesn't sing La Donna Mobile before he's 5 in Italy. They really begin probably at 3.
We see a lot of artists in history who have parents who don't see the worth of art, who don't see the worth of performance. Pavarotti's father really did. He saw singing as one of his great loves and one of the most important things you could do.
Before he learnt anything, I think Pavarotti was already a singer. I'd say that about a lot of singers, but in his particular case, because it was so natural, the voice was so natural, the approach was so utterly spontaneous, I think that, yes, he knew before, and so did everybody else who heard him.
Pavarotti's family did suffer during World War II, as did all of Italy. They had to move away from Modena into a two-room house in the countryside. But still, throughout the war and those times of suffering, his father saw music as something that would really get them through, and so there was even more singing during the war than there had been before.
Luciano said that he grew up listening to Caruso, which of course you would, and he loved Mario Lanza, which is, I guess, kind of rebellious.
It's interesting that Pavarotti, along with other singers, have seen Mario Lanza as such a great inspiration. Pavarotti said that he'd go and see him in the movies and then come back and pretend to be him in the mirror. And some opera critics can sort of exclude Mario Lanza from the pantheon of great stars, but I do think that we see with Pavarotti the massive impact that Lanza had on working class culture, because that's what Pavarotti was.
For the young Pavarotti, singing was regarded as merely a hobby. Now, in his teens, Luciano had other ideas of what he wanted to do with his life.
Luciano had this dream of being a professional footballer. He was football mad. He remained football mad all his life. His mother tried to persuade him to find a proper career, and he did actually train as a primary school teacher.
It was when he was teaching, when he was sort of late teenage years, when he'd abandoned the idea of being a goalkeeper, he really started to think seriously about music.
Also growing up in the same town was another great opera singer, Mirella Freni. And their mamas both worked in the cigar factory together.
Here's this girl that he's known for a long time, and she too is trying to make it as a singer. And it did create this lifelong relationship. They did duet with each other later on.
Modena would also provide Pavarotti with his first teacher, opera singer Arrigo Pola.
Arrigo Pola was a great tenor. And of course, there's Fernando, Luciano's father, who goes to Pola and he says, my son is a great singer. Pola said, yeah, I hear this all the time. He said, but please, would you audition him? So Luciano gives him 15 minutes. And Pola said, not only will I coach your son, you don't have to pay me to do it.
Pavarotti, I think, was very lucky in his two first formal teachers, Arrigo Pola and Campogalliani, mainly because they just drilled him. He had a very, very classical training. They made him sing endless scales. They were quite boring, but my God, they gave him the most solid cast iron technique, and he was really, really lucky to have that, I think.
A singer, if you want to go on in the year, must be a student, eternal student. I began a study when I was 6, at school, of course. At 20, I began my career, professionally career studying.
Llangollen, a small town in North Wales, again welcomes people from many lands to its annual International Eisteddfod.
In 1955, when Pavarotti was 20, his choir, the Chorale Rossini, decided to enter the International Eisteddfod in Llangollen, and they all set off to Wales, never been there before. They threw themselves into Welsh culture, staged with the local people, as was the custom, so they didn't have to pay. And they were electrifying at the Eisteddfod. They were incredible. And they actually won first prize.
Luciano's noticed there's a picture of him where he's in the back, and you can see this big confidence face, and it's just a fantastic picture, and you can see the pride in Fernando's face.
This, Pavarotti always said, was the actual moment in which he realised he could make it as a singer. That, for him, was his greatest experience and the turning point when he saw, this is what my life could be like. Big prizes, festivals, singing for a living.
I always say that to the journalists when they ask me what is the day more memorable in my life. And I always say, Denise, when I won this competition.
40 years later, he went back and sang there again, which was an event clearly of some sentimental significance to him.
It's a beautiful story because Wales is the land of song, and to have him discovered, for the world to discover him in Wales is quite a beautiful thing.
Around the time of his first success in Wales, Pavarotti would meet Adua Veroni. The two would marry in 1961 and have 3 children together. Luciano continued his studies in Modena, only for disaster to strike, forcing him to give up singing.
Quite early in his career, he had a nodule on his vocal cords, and this is a terrible moment for any singer.
But actually, paradoxically, he said that the nodule was a good thing because it meant that he could take a step back and regroup and think, and then all the stress was off, and then sing for pleasure. And he did, and the nodule went.
Luciano Pavarotti, you could say a lot of things about him, but one thing he certainly was, he was a hard-working man, and he was always singing, always getting into contests and doing things, and he entered one called the Paddy Contest, and he won it. And that opened the doors for him because it was a contest, everybody was there, and they saw him, and they just wanted him.
In 1961, Luciano Pavarotti made his opera debut in Reggio Emilia as Rodolfo in Puccini's La Bohème. The rest, as they say, is history.
His debut in La Bohème was conducted by Francesco Molinari Pradelli, who was an old-school Italian maestro and with whom Pavarotti got on very well. And I think Molinari Pradelli saw Pavarotti's potential.
That is a big moment. He is playing a big role in a big opera in quite a significant opera house. So this is really something for a boy who is just 26.
He made a much more significant debut in 1963 at the prestigious Vienna Staatsoper, singing both Bohème and Traviata, and then he was properly launched.
With momentum building and further praise being cast his way, the young singer reprised the role of Rodolfo at the Belfast Opera House, earning him more notable attention.
He was a wonderful Rodolfo because he was commanding, he was compassionate, he was sympathetic, he had an emotional core to the way he sang, to the way he phrased.
Luciano was such a success in Belfast, so of course the Royal Opera House takes him and asks him to understudy the great Giuseppe Di Stefano, Luciano's idol.
He was spotted by Joan Ingpen from the famous agency, and she managed to get him some performances understudying Rodolfo here at Covent Garden.
Pavarotti would not have to wait long for his breakthrough and made his debut on the Royal Opera House stage that same year, stepping in for an indisposed Giuseppe Di Stefano.
There was Pavarotti, this young man, singing on the Royal Opera House stage, and he made the absolute most of the fact he was a stand-in. He pulled out all the stops, he gave a brilliant performance.
The Covent Garden does not stand and scream, and they did that night for him.
He was known here as Big Lucy. He was always a huge favourite here at Covent Garden, and we know all the reasons for that. You know, this, as I say, this quintessential Italian tenor voice, but also this warm personality that he brought to the stage too.
He would further enhance his career when he performed on British primetime television to an audience of 15 million.
Now, a lot of opera singers would have turned that down. They would have seen it as down market or a bit too popular. But Pavarotti jumped at the opportunity, and that was really very canny.
He turned out to be extremely telegenic. He was tall, he was rather good looking, and he flashed this wonderful smile with his great white teeth, and this was the beginning of a second stream to his career.
He was beamed into all these homes, not just the upper middle classes who tended to go to the opera, but also the working classes, the ordinary people who really thought, gosh, this is an exciting man.
He wanted to demonstrate that the opera is something very popular, that all the people can hear. Not only the opera have not to be closed inside the theater, inside the historical theater, and he proposed the opera at the big audience. That was one of the historical heritage that Pavarotti left.
There was a warmth to him, and he would always walk around Covent Garden and other opera houses giving people big bear hugs. That's very, very connecting for people, I think. I think that they can relate to that kind of warmth, which of course communicates itself in his singing, but also, I think, in the personality that he brings to the roles that he performed.
It would be here at the Glyndebourne Festival Luciano would perform in Mozart's Idomeneo in 1964.
Luciano Pavarotti sang here as a young man. He sang the role of Idamante in Idomeneo, and I was 1 year old, so I cannot remember him singing, but I've heard many stories that he took Glyndebourne by storm, was a huge success, and I've heard the recording, and he certainly was the star of that particular production. Certainly in his early career, he had a huge amount of charm. And he still had that charm later on, but I think he relied more on his voice than his dramatic expertise, because I think his voice did make everybody melt. So he relied on that rather than all of his other skills.
He'd been rushing around, singing all the big roles, going from opera house to opera house, and Glyndebourne gave him a kind of respite, gave him Mozart, and that was always important for him in his life as well.
World-famous Australian opera star Joan Sutherland arrives at the Chevron Hotel, Sydney, for a luncheon in her honour.
In 1963, Pavarotti was invited by the great Joan Sutherland to join her on a tour of Australia. And yes, she liked his voice, but also she liked his stature. She was looking for a tenor who was taller than her.
They got on surprisingly well. I think Pavarotti always regarded her not as a surrogate mother, but more like his big sister. And she was very, very good at dealing with him.
She gave him something that was very important for him for the rest of his life, and he never forgot it. She taught him how to breathe. He'd been singing so much. He had wonderful technique, but that was the last little piece of the gift.
This really made a huge difference to his abilities and his range, and in particular the top of his voice. The conductor, Richard Boninge, Sutherland's husband, was also a great influence, and he remained very, very close to Boninge all the way through his life.
Vocally, he was incredible. He had such amazing breath control. There was a beautiful lightness to the quality of the voice. He really was the greatest I've heard.
The chance to perform at Milan's La Scala can be regarded as a career pinnacle for any Italian opera singer. Luciano Pavarotti would take one step closer to this dream when he joined the La Scala European tour and caught the eye of one of opera's most legendary directors.
The big goal that every opera singer wants is to sing at La Scala, particularly the Italian opera singer.
And Maestro Zeffirelli notices him and decides that he's the perfect Rudolfo for his production of La Bohème, with the great Herbert von Karajan conducting. And the other gift is that his childhood mate, Mirella Freni, is singing the Mimi. So it's wonderful. It's a wonderful, glorious, Italian, beautiful thing, and it's a great success.
There were some problems with him, because acting for Pavarotti was very difficult in a way. He was a singer with a great voice, unique singer with a great voice. To make him move, with that body, with that physique, was difficult. So Zeffirelli had to adapt himself in putting Pavarotti on stage.
In 1966, fresh from his triumphant performances at La Scala, Luciano Pavarotti returned to Covent Garden as Tony in Donizetti's light-hearted La Fille du Régiment.
He was singing with Joan Sutherland as his leading lady, and they just had a ball together. And I was lucky enough, when I was in short trousers, to see this performance. And it was the first opera I'd ever seen, and wow, did I enjoy it.
It is legendary because it begins his high seas career. He becomes the king of the high seas. bump, 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 one after the other, and no one has ever done this before.
People just thought this was wonderful, and he went on doing it for years to come. This was his sort of party piece, if you like.
I always try to sing the aria two or three times in the dressing room, in the way that when I was out, I was, I don't say tired, but already very warm. Still very difficult.
During this time of great press attention, Herbert Breslin sees in Pavarotti an opportunity for global domination.
Herbert Breslin comes into his life in the mid-60s when he makes his debut in America, who is a sort of wheeler-dealer, manager-agent figure who I think is not a great opera lover by any means, but senses that Pavarotti has got this commercial potential that needs to be exploited.
February 17th, 1972 is one of those legendary opera dates because Luciano Pavarotti debuts at the Met. The audience gives him 17 curtain calls. That was the beginning for him. He became the king of opera. That was it. He was the king.
Pavarotti is then signed to Decca Records to record the Italian classics. This album, the idea is it's going to be for everyone. So really, with Pavarotti, they're saying he's not just a star for the opera house, he's also a recording star.
During the 10 years that I worked for Decca, I saw him in Tosca and Aida at Covent Garden. It was always thrilling to see him, and it was great to hear a real Italian tenor voice, which is not as common as you might think.
Here was a voice that was molten gold, pure beauty and expressive as well, poised in the way he phrased the music, so you could tell that here was a singer who was going to go places.
Nei cieli visi guardo i mille camioni Parigi e penso a quel poltrone un vecchio cavalletto ingannatore che vive in ozio dove andrà signore.
During the 70s, his career really takes off in New York at the Met, mainly because of La Fille du Régiment, those ridiculous top Cs. And Breslin gets him this whole slew of wonderful PR coups. He gets the cover of Time magazine, and suddenly he is this big, big personality.
I think there was one point where he had about 5 albums in the Billboard Classical Top 100. And I think increasingly, it became quite difficult to bring him back to Covent Garden, although we did on many occasions, simply because he was so in demand.
Aspetti, signorina, le dirò con due parole, chi
There was one moment which I think possibly marked the high watermark of his career. I think it would be the Puritanis that he did at the Met with Joan Sutherland. God, I would love to have been there. That must have been sensational.
He was a name that people who didn't even like opera knew about. He is Pavarotti, he's the big man. And I Puritani was a huge success. They were a great partnership, a great marriage.
It was just stupendous. It was just incredible. It was the invention of the idea of the opera superstar for the guy who flipped hamburgers. This was it.
The 1970s made Luciano Pavarotti into a global phenomenon, and with that came the pressures and obligations of any in-demand superstar. The following decade proved to be an even more successful but exhausting one for the singer.
He was a very famous singer, a huge recording artist, but he starts to get a bit tired, I think. He starts to say, I don't want to learn new roles.
The tide inevitably began to turn against him. He had a few problems, cancelled some performances, spurred on by Breslin and other people who wanted their slice of the cake, as it were. I think he was taking on too much.
In 1989, I had promised Tower Records in Piccadilly Circus the next Luciano Pavarotti signing in London. And after about 10 minutes, Herbert Breslin said, okay, I think he's tired. I think we should wrap it up now. So I said, I'll tell you what, Herbert, I'll go and ask him. So I went to see Luciano, who was surrounded by people, ladies giving him roses. And I said, Luciano, you tired? No, no, no. You're quite happy? Oh, yes. He really was a world celebrity. And you could see that by the amount of people that we had press coverage for a record signing, which you don't normally get, because it was an event.
At the start of the 1980s, Pavarotti set up and became heavily involved in his international voice competition for young singers, in which he would perform with the winners.
Although he was by now very wealthy, very famous, mobbed everywhere he went, he still wanted very much to think about people who came from a different type of class.
He's desperate to get people to understand and appreciate this art form. He was an ambassador of it. He gave young singers a chance.
There was in the jury of Pavarotti competition in Philadelphia, and with a young cast from these competitions, we realized Bohème, and we went in Peking, Beijing, in China, the first time opera, Italian opera in Beijing, with Luciano Pavarotti and the young singers. I saw the audience, old men, sang the word with Luciano, with an emotion marvelous.
V'entrare con voi l'ora per I miei sogni usati, e I miei sogni miei, tosto sili.
By the late 80s, Luciano Pavarotti was a global superstar, appearing in numerous operas around the world and gaining new fans with every performance.
I saw with him Bohème at the Metropolitan with Freni. And I must say, for that occasion, because it was a big thing for him, you know, to face that production, he had lost like 20 kilos. In that particular occasion was really wonderful because he moved around, you know, with the duelers, with the friends and all, he moved around, and it was an incredible experience, even because the Frele brought Kleiber to the Met for the first time. So it was an incredible, you know, Freni, Pavarotti, Kleiber at the Met. It was a unique event, a unique chance for Pavarotti to do something more than singing.
I saw him sing Cavaradossi in Tosca, Covent Garden twice. And everybody says, oh, Pavarotti wasn't really much of an actor. Actually, he was. Roles like Nemorino in L'Elisir d'Amore suited his comic timing really well.
With performances piling up, the singer began to find the grueling workload too stressful.
In the late 1980s, Pavarotti began to get a reputation for cancelling performances.
He cancelled quite a number of times at the Lyric, and you can't do that a lot, even if you are Luciano Pavarotti, you just can't.
The very, very feisty lady who was the director of the Chicago Opera, Ardis Krainig, fired him very, very publicly and said she didn't want anything more to do with him. And this was a PR disaster.
The simple thing is that when he was hugely famous in the 70s and the 80s, everyone wanted a piece of him. Everyone wanted to see him, everyone wanted to see him sing, and he was probably pushed too hard.
The other thing was that I think he began to realise how much money he could make doing arena concerts compared with the relatively miserable sums he was making doing opera, which was far harder work.
Perhaps Pavarotti's most iconic aria, Nessun Dorma, reached pop status when a 1972 recording of his went to #2 in the UK charts, after it was used as the theme for BBC Television's coverage of the 1990 FIFA World Cup in Italy. Pavarotti notably sang the aria on the eve of the tournament's final, when he took to the stage with Jose Carreras and Placido Domingo for the very first three tenors concert.
The three tenors singing so electrifying, so amazing, so cataclysmically, bringing everything to a standstill. They were absolutely incredible. And it has to be said that out of the three tenors, Pavarotti was the star.
He was as famous at this point as anybody on the planet. The album that was made of the 1990 World Cup concert remains the biggest selling classical album ever by a long chalk.
It was just groundbreaking. You can play it now, the three of them singing, and just about everybody knows who's singing it and where it came from.
The thing about Pavarotti is his vocal charisma. You only have to hear half a minute of him singing and you know who he is. Now, you can't say that about a lot of singers, but certainly true of him.
This is the one moment in my life where I thought opera is really, really part of the ordinary culture. I can remember going into a pub and hearing these people having this terrifically heated argument about who was the best. You know, do you prefer Pavarotti? Now I think Domingo's the best one. What about that Carreras fellow? No, Pavarotti singing Nessun Dorma, that was amazing. That's never happened again.
He did 34 three-tenor concerts all the way up to 2003. And everybody knew who they were, and it brought opera to the masses, which is what you want.
After years of performing to millions of people in all four corners of the globe, the effort placed on Pavarotti's voice and body started to take its toll.
There was one terrible occasion when he sang the opening night of the season at La Scala, which is a big event in Italy, broadcast nationally. He was singing the title role in Verdi's Don Carlos, and he cracked embarrassingly, very, very obviously on one note. And this was front page news in Italy, and I think it must have really shaken his confidence.
It's not an easy time for him. His marriage is breaking down, things become very difficult, and he fails to complete a concert in Washington, and that is really the turning point.
In 2004, Luciano Pavarotti announced he would be retiring from singing. However, the great maestro felt he had one tour left in him, which would see him sell out stadiums and arenas one last time.
He tours the world, singing these great roles that have made him so famous. And he says, I'm 69 now, I'm coming to an end. This is the final tour, your last chance to see me. And of course, the audiences flock there. It's a sellout. Everyone's thrilled and delighted. They think he's incredible. They think he's marvelous. He sang his goodbye at the Winter Olympics when he knew he was suffering from pancreatic cancer. And then he returned to his own home to live out his final days.
In the year following his magical last performance at the 2006 Winter Olympics, Luciano Pavarotti died, aged 71.
Pavarotti had touched so many people's lives with his heart, with his passion, with his commitment. The fact he was pure emotion, pure strength, and when he died, some light in the world went out.
When you talk about singers over the last 50 years who have an indelible quality that once you hear them, you never forget them, I think Pavarotti has to be near the top of the list.
Pavarotti is one of these miracles. He has the gift that only a handful of singers ever had. You knew who was singing. He's a one-off. Nobody will replace him. Pavarotti.
To this day, he remains one of the few opera singers who is really a household name.
He is the one singer of this century who really took operatic music to ordinary people who wouldn't think of going to an opera house. If you say opera to the man in the street, he will say Pavarotti. Opera means Pavarotti.